Hi everyone and welcome back to my channel. Today I'm here with a super exciting video and that is the release of the Phoebe sewing pattern. I am wearing one of the samples. It's a Bohemian inspired dress by the 70s and it has a ruffle with elastic, then a slit in the front with little ties. You can do either one just at the top or have another one in the middle. Then I added these little tassels, which is optional. And then here, under the bust, it has some elastic. But it can also be like removed, like you don't sew in elastic. And then it will look something like this. This is just a little bit of a hack that I did. So I added a square neckline. Then removed the seam allowance of the front pieces. So you cut it on the fold. Still it's just double lined, so 2 pieces. And then I made the skirt a little bit wider, so there are more gathers here. And then didn't add any elastic here. And then it's also just a really cute little dress that you get. So this is a pattern that has so many possible variations, hacks. There are 3 views. There is a top, a mini and a midi dress. It can obviously be lengthened or shortened as you wish. Then there are 2 possible ways to purchase the pattern. You can either buy a PDF, which is then sent to your email. With the PDF purchase you get an A4 size, US letter size, A0 for the copy shop, and then the instructions in A4 size. That can either be displayed on a computer or a tablet or anything, or you can print it out at home. And then with purchasing the printed pattern, it is about double the price, but definitely worth it in my opinion. I spent a lot of time on making this happen and making this possible, and it feels really nice to have something tangible. You can see it here already in the background, but I will show you a bit better. You first off, of course, get a little envelope with a really nice illustrations that I made. The pattern I actually didn't mention, but it comes in a size 34 to a 52 European size. And it's about an intermediate pattern. I wouldn't say it's for absolute beginners, but it definitely is not very difficult. So if you're willing the challenge, you can definitely sew this up. And also with the video tutorial with it, I think it makes it a lot easier. And then on the back, it just has the, like technical information. So the sizing chart and then how much fabric you need and how much elastic you need. So that counts the elastic for both the wrist and for under the bust. Then inside the envelope you will find the pattern printed in A0 size, so you do not have to stick any papers together, glue them, cut them, anything like that. You just have to cut your size, or if you want to make it more often, you can trace your size on pattern paper and then cut out that size. And this is like the thicker type of paper, so it's not like typical pattern paper, but it's very difficult to come by, and this does make it more long lasting in my opinion. It's just a little bit thicker. With that you also receive a little Mipi the Label sewing tag that you can sew in your finished object, which is really cute. I love these gold letters. It says the handmade label. So you get that, and then you also get an A5 instruction booklet with the same illustration, front and back. This is the hashtag if you decide to share it on Instagram. It's hashtag Mipi Phoebe. And if you use the hashtag I can see what you make, which I would really be happy to see all the things that you guys decide to make. I'm super excited for it. Then this pattern, in contrast to my clover skirt pattern, it is fully illustrated. So all of the information that you need to make this pattern and how to make it is inside the little booklet, and it's just really nice to have it printed. And I think if you're making a pattern multiple times, this is a really nice investment, and honestly just a really nice to have. You can put it on display if you like. So I think that's all that I had to say, and now we can get started with the sewing tutorial. Definitely do use the hashtag on Instagram or just follow me over there if you wish to see more of my sewing patterns. And also knitting patterns that I'm going to be releasing soon. And yeah, I hope you enjoy, and I will see you guys next time. Here are all the materials that you're going to need to make the Phoebe dress. I'm starting out with the fabric. I used about 3 meters to make a mini dress, and you will need matching thread. Then I have the printed pattern in A4 size, it's 26 papers. Then I use tape and paper scissors, very important. Then fabric scissors and a measuring tape. And then I like to use sewing clips as well as sewing pins, but the sewing clips are optional. Then you need elastic with 1 centimeter width or 3/8 of an inch. And then I use some tools for threading elastic, whichever you prefer. And this is optional, it's a magnetic sewing guide that will help you sew straight. And then also optional, I added 2 cotton tassels. Now we can get started with the pattern. I start by laying out the pattern by number. So 1, 2, 6 and then the row below. Then I'm folding the vertical side on the line on one of the sides. And then I will match up the diamonds and then tape it in place. Then I will complete an entire row horizontally and then cut the top of one of them. And then I place that one that I cut on top of the other one that still has the border. And then I will match up the diamonds and then tape that in place. Then I like to continue till I have one pattern piece and then cut that one out so you don't have a lot of paper laying on the floor, so you go one by one. Then I place the pattern on my folded fabric and I like to use some paper weights, but you can also pin it in place. And then I cut out all of my pattern pieces and make sure to copy the notches. Then here I shortened the skirt without cutting the pattern. I cut the notches on the side and then moved the pattern up. And then I could copy the line of the midi view instead of the mini view. So then my pattern is still complete. Then here are all the pattern pieces you will need. You will need 2 bias cut straps, then 2 or 4 front bodice pieces, 1 or 2 back bodices on fold, and then 2 sleeves on fold, and then also 2 skirts on fold. Now we are going to sew the bodice. With right sides together, I'm going to sew the shoulder seams. I like to first finish the edges with an overlocker. And then after that I will sew it and then you get an exactly 1 centimeter seam. Then I will fold the bias cut straps in half lengthwise with right sides together and then sew it with a 3 mm seam allowance. At the end with the needle down I will lift the presser foot up and then turn, and then you can get a perfectly 90-degree edge, and then I sew straight towards the folded edge. Then I will trim this seam to also be 3 mm. And then I use this elastic threader, but you can also use a narrow paintbrush or something. You just need something long and thin. Then I will pull the seam allowance apart and then insert it inside of the strap. Then I will insert my elastic threader inside of it. And then I will start pulling the strap down. And then eventually it will come out of the other side, and then with the right side facing. You can take it off and then start pulling again, and then you will have your strap inside out. Here is to add the cotton tassel. I place it on top and sew it down. Sew it as close as possible to the actual tassel, and then make sure to trim the ends. Then I will make a loop with the strap and then pull the tassel through the loop. And then just gently start pulling it down as far as you can. So don't immediately make it a knot. And then it should look like this. Then for the bodice, you will have one bodice for the front and then one bodice that is the lining. I'm going to iron those seams in the opposite direction, so it will lay flat once we sew them together. Then you will have to mark the notch, and then you're gonna place a pin there and sew. If you want to make the option with 4 straps, you're gonna sew 3 centimeters from the bottom edge. And then the second tassels later you're gonna place at where the notch is. We're gonna sew right sides together with a 1/2 centimeter seam allowance. And then I like to press open that seam so everything will lay flat. Then we're gonna place the 2 bodices on top of each other with right sides together, so you will have the main fabric and the lining fabric, or they can be the same. Then I start by lining up the shoulder seams in the opposite directions and then pin everything. Then line up the neck and the front slit. This one is quite important. Then you will take the tassels and you will sandwich it in between those two layers and make sure that it's right at the edge of that pin. And pin in place, and as you can see, it has a little bit of an overlap. Then we're gonna start by sewing from the neck notch, right where that stitching ends. We're gonna start sewing with 5mm seam allowance. And just like before, when we've sewn over the strap, you're gonna put the needle down, lift the presser foot up, and then turn your work so you have exactly 90-degree corner. And from here we're gonna sew with 1cm seam allowance all the way around. And then after sewing, we're gonna clip into the curved edges of the neckline and make sure to not cut the stitching. And this will help everything lay flatter. Then you will turn the bodice to the right side. And you're gonna iron to press everything nicely and flat. And then your bodice is complete and we can move on to making the sleeves. I'm gonna start by overlocking the bottom edges of both sleeves. Then we're gonna fold this edge to the inside by measuring 8 cm. There are also notches on both sides. And we're gonna iron that flat. Then we will open the sleeve up again so that the side seams are together and then overlock them. And then I will sew with a 1cm seam allowance. Then we can fold the ruffle back in and then pin it in place. And that's why we ironed it before, because it's a little bit easier than ironing it in the round. Place that underneath the free arm of your sewing machine. So if you look closely, you can see that my sewing machine has suddenly become more narrow. And then we're gonna sew around the entire circumference on the overlocked edge. So we're sewing 8 cm from the edge. And then when you reach the end, you're gonna leave a 4 cm opening. So here you can see my opening. Then we are going to sew another sewing line 1.5 cm away from the first one. And this one, you're not gonna leave an opening, so sew all the way around. Then take your wrist elastic according to your size chart and attach it to your preferred elastic threader. So you can also use a safety pin. Then you're gonna insert it through the opening. Then I like to take the other end of the elastic and pin it in place so you don't lose it. And then you can start pulling it through. I like to double knot my elastic, but you can also sew it by 1 cm overlap. Pull it inside and then you can start closing the opening. Then I like to iron the ruffle with steam to really shrink in that elastic. Now we're going to sew 2 gathering lines between the sleeve cap notches. A gathering stitch is basically not back stitching at the beginning, stitching with the longest stitch length and then leaving long threads at the start and at the end that you can pull on later. Then here you can see that the sleeve is already attached and we're gonna attach the other one. We are going to start by finding the shoulder seam and pinning the 2 layers together so that they don't move around. And then we start in the corners. Then I start pinning it in place until I reach the notch of the gathering lines. So there's one. And then after I reached it, I'm gonna start at the other corner point and work to the other notch. So you will have excess fabric like this that we will gather to fit in between the 2 notches. So together you're gonna take 2 top threads of each gathering line and then pull on it. And then you will see that the fabric will start to gather. So I keep gathering it to fit and then I will pin it in place. Then I will sew the shoulder seam with 1 cm seam allowance, so I overlock it later. Because it's very important to sew the gathers carefully and you can adjust them as you go. And now we will finish the seam with an overlocker. And here's how that should look. Then I like to iron the shoulder seams flat on the bodice so everything is nice and secure. And then we can start sewing the skirt. I'm placing the front and the back skirt pieces right sides together. And then I like to sew the skirt side seams together on the overlocker as before. And then sew with a 1 cm seam allowance on the sewing machine. Then I like to iron the seams so everything stays nice and flat. And then we will overlock around the entire circumference of the skirt. And then when you've finished, you just pull away to make it complete. And cut the threads. Now we're going to sew 2 gathering lines between the 2 top notches of the skirt. As before, no backstitching on the longest stitch length and then leaving long threads at the start and at the finish. Now we're going to fold the hem of the skirt by 3 centimeters and then you can either iron or pin it in place. Ironing is better. Then we're going to sew all around the circumference of the skirt, and this is where I like to use my magnetic sewing guide. Now we're going to attach the skirt to the bodice and the sleeves. So I insert my arm inside of the skirt at the side seam and then I will line it up with the side seams of the sleeves. And then I will pull the skirt over it so it's inside out, and then I start by matching up all of the side seams and pinning them in place. And then we will work towards the notches as before and then gather the fabric to fit in place so you have no excess fabric anywhere. To gather the fabric, take 2 top threads of each gathering line and then start pulling it. And then I like to pin it in place, and then we're gonna sew all the way around it with a 1 centimeter seam allowance. In the instructions booklet, this is done the opposite way, but both ways is fine. Just make sure to think about it, whether you're gonna leave in the elastic or if you're gonna exclude it. Then overlock the entire edge. Then I'm gonna sew another sewing line 1.5 centimeters away from the first one. So if you want to make the version without elastic, you would just skip this step, but it will add 2 centimeters in length. And then we're gonna leave a 4 centimeter opening to insert the elastic through. So cut the elastic according to the size chart and then insert it in the opening. So as you can see here, I have to insert it from the right side of the fabric. And then in the pattern instructions, you are inserting it from the inside. So we're gonna insert it through the opening. Then I like to pin the other end of the elastic in place so it stays secure. And then we're gonna start pulling the elastic threader through the casing. Then I like to close the elastic with a double knot, but you can also sew them together with a zigzag stitch. Then we're gonna sew the opening closed. Then you really have to iron the skirt with steam, and then I keep pulling it in between to really make everything nice and even. And after that, your dress will be finished. I hope you enjoyed sewing this dress, and please share it with me on Instagram if you do, and I hope you have a really nice day.